It's like, oh, well, you live in a Chinese neighborhood. What about open borders for Israel? Alright, because like we know, right, China is gonna invade Taiwan, invade Japan, invade. I don't want to engage in like yellow peril bullshit, but you know, Chinese nationalists are doing this, so it is fine. Lost what? No. But yeah, I mean, it's they're gonna invade, and it's somewhat because this is what nationalism is, right? Advancing your interests, advancing your national and ethnic interests means wanting the resources of other countries and wanting the territory of other nations for yourself. It doesn't mean kind of respecting the ethnic homelands for everybody. No. Like, notice how they'll always say that, and it's like, well, okay, well, you know, it's like, why, like, how is that a nationalist position? Like, how is that, like, it's always based on, like, human rights and this kind of thing of everybody has the right to separatism. Well, I guess the Chinese don't believe that, because they're gonna invade fucking Taiwan, and they're gonna invade Japan, and they're gonna invade South Korea and the Philippines, and maybe even North Korea. That's gonna be a battle to watch. North Korea. It'll be interesting to see how that works out, because I think they have, like, a weird relationship. I've seen them maybe beefing before, but they've also been, like, friends or something, so it'll be interesting to see how North Korea and try to get along. But yeah, Uyghur Muslims should be completely safe, right, Steve? The China didn't let in a bunch of like African like migrants or something. that's that's what like they're gonna. That's what they're gonna show, right? It's like a Uyghur Muslims in an internment Chinese internment camp. One of them like escapes, and they run into like an African in like China, and they get murdered or something, and you can just see like Sailor be like, maybe you shouldn't have left the internment camp. Demographics of destiny. Like, you just know they're gonna completely do that, right? You know they're gonna do that, right, man? You know, nationals. Like, Sailor's life must have been. Can you imagine, like, Steve Sailor during 9/11? Like, where was Steve Sailor during 9/11, right? Like, you can totally fucking see this, right? Because, like, 9/11, 3,000, you know, not Muslims, sorry. Pretty much 3,000 Americans were murdered, right? In terror attacks, and, you know, I can't remember, it was 19 Islamic hijackers, 19 Muslim hijackers. I think there were immigrants too, so I'll give you that. They hijacked a bunch of planes, flew them into towers, and murdered 3,000 Americans. We're rounding up a little bit. I think it's 2,000, like 9, like 6, 7, whatever it's been, 3,000. And that's not funny. That's horrible. That's, by the way. And laugh is what's for next. And it's like, okay, but during that time, I can imagine, because I think it was like, I don't know how old it was, but I would imagine like the only thing people talked about during that time was 3,000 people being murdered. Like an insane, you know, everybody's like, oh my god, what does this mean? A Wiener attack? Is this Pearl Harbor? Oh my god, oh my god. And people are scared and they're terrified, right? And so the only thing you saw in the news was that, right? You weren't going to be a dick and be like, what about, you know, you weren't going to pull one of those. You, like, you know, everybody came together, that kind of thing. But can you imagine, like, how pissed off Steve Sail, like, would have been because, like, during that same weekend, because, like, this was probably going for, like, 2, 3, 4 weeks where they showed just nothing but 9/11 on, like, CNN and that kind of thing. But during that same time, we know, if we believe we are supporting Sailor's framework, that blacks, 13% of America's population, Steve, you know, 52% of homicides, and that doesn't stop during 9/11 weekend, Steve. It doesn't. So you could just imagine him sitting there being like, 50 people shot in Chicago over the weekend, but he knows. He can't sit there and say, why aren't the media covering this? 3,000 dead Americans, Steve, because of Muslim immigrant hijackers. So they've because you know, like, this is an admission that there are things that are worse than black crime. And Steve's whole persona is that's not the case. You can't sit there, like, and if you say that, it's just like, what neighborhood do you live in? Right? It's like, oh, you live in a white neighborhood? Well, But you can't, like, point this out. You can't. So, like, those blacks were having a fucking, like, bonanza. You know, those, like, black criminals and black thugs, right, were having, like, a party. And Sailor's just, like, head is exploding, like... Because you just can't. You can't say, meanwhile in Chicago. It's like, shut up. Like, shut up. Because it's not the biggest deal in the world. There are things that upstage it, right? And 9/11 was a perfect example. Because when that was happening, you couldn't talk about anything else. Like, if you talked about anything else, you'd get slaughtered, right? You'd be like, shut the fuck up. Is this really, like, who cares? Exactly. But you can't. So, like, I mean, just imagine, like, being, you know, because, like, Sailor does the whole thing where just, like, well, you know, there's, like, I think there was a gas station clerk or something who correctly predicted that the Muslim hijackers were gonna hijack planes and fly into towers, in terms of, like, he thought they looked like terrorists or something. And you could just tell, too, it's like, you know, Steve probably would have, like, wanted the gas station clerk to racially profile, like, the blacks nearby instead. Right? Like, if he was there, he definitely would have been like, shut up. Here's FBI crime stats for you. Who do you think is more likely to commit crime? But yeah, Sailor's whole, I don't know if I've ever said this in a video or not before, but, like, Sailor's life during, like, 9/11. So where was Sailor during 9/11? It was like, this just must be the worst. Like, you can't. Yeah, you want to talk about black crime, but you can't. Something has upstaged it, which we can't say that, right? We can't acknowledge that there's at least times, because, like, these people, I think someone, like, said that, like, Helen Andrews or something she's like this, like, I don't know what she is. She's like I don't know. I saw her, like, criticize, like, white identity politics, but she seems like, I thought she was a paleocon, so who the hell knows? I don't know. Like, she said, like, she'd agreed with Christopher Rufo that we shouldn't embrace it or something, so it's like, okay. Kind of caught me by surprise, but anyways, she's like this, like, conservative who, you know, constantly runs interference for, I don't want to say historic white crime, but, like, you know, residential schools as an example, or, you know, she just has a habit of running interference for this shit. So I saw someone say, I may not be able to find, like, a receipt of this, if you got me, but someone, who gives a shit? Nobody's gonna watch this crap. But someone was, like, implying, this was like a paleocon or like a wingnut celebrating this, implying that, like, Jews were safer in the Soviet Union than they are, like, modern day, like, New York or something, and she was tying it to, like, blacks or something. I don't know. It's for, like, you know what what it was suggesting, and it's like these people can't comprehend. Like, there's worse things than 50 people shot in Chicago. Like, there's worse things, and 9/11 is a perfect example of that, right? Like, you know, here's 9/11, 3,000 dead Americans, and then there's, like, 50 people shot in Chicago and by blacks or something. Like, it's, like, you know, it's not, like, but yeah, like, if, like, Xi Jinping was black, or it was blacks doing this to Uyghur Muslims, we would have to hear yet again about how, well, this is because, you know, blacks have a on average IQ of 80, African Americans have an on average IQ of 85, or they have an on average IQ of 75. And having an on average IQ of 75 leads towards lower impulse control, lower, less self-control, less empathy, and that's why blacks commit more crimes. And that would be the story. But when whites or Chinese do it, you're either accused of white guilt, or it's pretty much like, it's like this game of, I don't see this, right? Like, it's just so disgusting, and it's just so obvious how there's legitimate critiques of these people in these debates, and, if you completely buy, like, Sailor's bullshit, then I feel fucking sorry for you. Like, if you can't see, like, as an example, right there, like, but, I guess we can't acknowledge that. I mean, we have drone footage. Like, could you imagine, like the audacity of, like, a Uyghur Muslim being murdered in Sweden by, like, an African migrant. And people, after they fled high IQ, homogenous China's ethnic persecution of them, and these race realists say, well, I wonder why that black person murdered a Uyghur. Could it be that blacks are genetically violent? It's like, well, where the fuck are Uyghurs coming from, huh, bitch? Where the fuck are they coming from? They're coming from China, being fucking slaughtered and murdered and mass human rights violations. Okay? And, it's this weird game of refusing to acknowledge the obvious, legitimate, valid critiques. Because FBI crime stats confirms these people's whole narrative. Genghis Khan doesn't. Stalin doesn't. Hitler doesn't. The history of whites and all of the violence in Europe doesn't. All the wars throughout European history, that doesn't. All of the wars in Southeast Asian history, that doesn't. Right? But, FBI crime stats, right? It's like, I mean, it just, these people are so dishonest. But yeah, that's the reason why the bell curve didn't predict, okay? They didn't. Fuck no. Fuck no.